can you help me understand reason and reasoning without free will?
Yeah. Well, this comes up a lot, actually. This is really interesting because the idea is that, okay, suppose you have like two options to consider. Okay, 2 plus 2 is 4 and 2 plus 2 is 5. And in order to use reason to deduce the correct conclusion, you have to have free will because you have to look at both of them and you have to decide like which one is true or which one is more reasonable, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, I suppose, yeah, just when you say like to deduce, it seems that there's like a person doing a thing called deduction and aim at a thing called truth.
Yeah, in the sense that, a person can do a thing unfreely, just as like a car can roll down a hill without being free, right? So the question is, are we acting freely? And the easiest way to answer that question is just to analyze what goes on. It's like, okay, 2 plus 2 is 4 over here, 2 plus 2 is 5 over here. Why do you believe the first one is true and not the second one? It doesn't feel to me like it's a choice that I've made. It feels like I've just been led necessarily into the arms of a conclusion. Like when I convince you of something, if I had a more complicated mathematical syllogism that you were like, oh, I don't know if that follows, and I went step by step through the arguments. Like, you've heard of the Monty Hall problem?
I haven't.
It's this famous paradox about like, it's probably too convoluted to get into, but it's like a mathematical paradox that seems to have a counterintuitive conclusion, right? It seems like the answer should be a half, but it's actually a third, or whatever, vice versa. And if you heard this argument, you said, oh, I'm not convinced by that. And then I talked you through every step one by one. And eventually you kind of saw why that conclusion does follow. I don't think you've like made a choice there. I think that what's happened is I've just presented information to you that has just made you believe something. And I think that is the process of becoming convinced by something. When people say like the penny dropped or it just clicked, it's like, if you don't think that suppose you didn't know what multiplication was, and I said 3 times 3 is 9, and you were like, I don't know if that's true, I don't agree with you, and then I said, well, it just means 3, add 3, add 3. You don't choose to be convinced by that. You just are, And so the process of reasoning is something that that almost happens to you more than something you do, and that is on the view of someone who doesn't believe in free will.
And do you believe in free will?
So no, I've for a long time been pretty dubious of the concept in principle. However, I do, rather boringly for a lot of people, I kind of leave room for agnosticism on just about everything these days. And that does include free will. And the reason I say that is because if you take something like consciousness, this is a huge mystery to me. And I've spoken a lot about how like I think it's a really big trouble for materialism, consciousness. Like it causes a lot of problems, right? And I could present some argument that consciousness is impossible. I could say that material doesn't give rise to non-material properties. That doesn't work. I could pull up a great syllogism. I could produce a whole argument and say, see, consciousness is impossible. And yet, I just am conscious. And that's a mystery. There might be something like that going on with free will. Like maybe all of the arguments that we put forward are very compelling. Yeah, free will can't exist. And yet, through some mysterious thing or capacity that we don't understand, like we have it anyway. Like that's totally possible. So I want to clarify that by saying I leave room for that. It's possible that free will could exist in some way that is beyond our rational comprehension. But if you're looking for like arguments, if you're looking for to deduce something reasonably and whatnot, then I think the arguments point towards no free will.
So then if there's a difference of opinion between two people and they're looking at the exact same information, how do you explain that if it's literally just a matter of input equals output?
Because it's never quite as simple as that. Like if you had two genuinely identical situations, like if I had two computers that were built in exactly the same way in the same factory with the same materials, and we presented to them the same problem, they would give you the same answer, right? The reason why two people can look at the same thing and come to different conclusions is because they're different background information. They were brought up differently. They've got different embedded assumptions. They've got different experiences. Even if they're like identical twins, no two people live an identical life. The only way to make those two people actually identical is to make them identical. And then it's just one person. It's not two. So like when you say you can look at the same information and deduce a different opinion, that's only because the information that you see gets put together with everything else that's going on in your brain, all of your experiences, all of your past, and it's that gives you the final conclusion. And if all of that genuinely was exactly the same, then you would get the same result.
So do you essentially think of humans as, biological robots or biological machines?
I suppose that's one way of putting it, yeah. But like I say, I want to issue this throat clearing again, that there's obviously something very special about human beings, and there's something very mysterious about the way that we experience freedom and the way that we experience consciousness. And that throws a big spanner in the works, which is why I say I'm broadly agnostic. But as regards to free will, I don't think that you have any ultimate agency over your actions, even if you feel like you do.
So do you then also not believe in virtue?
Depends what you mean. I mean, for a lot of people, virtue might require free will. And it sounds like that's the implication that you're making. But virtuous behavior might be something like acting in accordance with the good. And there's nothing in principle stopping there being this thing called the good that people necessarily act or don't act in accordance with. And those who act in accordance with it are acting virtuously. Like you could still, conceptually speaking, literally have an idea of virtue with there being no free will. It would just become a less instructive concept to like determine your behaviors or whatever, or to talk about, judgment and moral condemnation. But it's still possible that it could exist.
It would disservice the idea of virtue, though, if by virtue we mean something that is admirable based on someone having chosen to do something in a sacrificial way or a self-giving way, etc. So it sort of devalues the idea of virtue to make it merely programmatic.
Yeah, and it's the most famous trouble that people have with there being no free will is the removal of agency that this has. I mean, there's a whole load of conversations to have about this. I mean, to give you an idea, like, you can imagine the person who, like the firefighter, who runs into the building to save the child and comes outside, and everyone goes, "Oh, you're such a hero," and the person says, "I just couldn't have lived with myself if I didn't do it. I had to. I just had to go in there and save them. I couldn't stop myself." We would think that person is more virtuous for their saying that they just had to go in. They couldn't help it. But what are they saying there? They're saying that they were sort of doing it for their own sake, crudely speaking. They're saying that there's something that just made them feel like they have to go inside. And in some contexts, we see this almost feeling that you didn't have it, like something just came over you and you just had to do it as an increase in virtue. But in this abstract sense, we see that kind of thing as decreasing virtue, right? So there is a lot of conversation to have around
that would only increase virtue in the scenario of free will, because it would mean that particular person had such a good heart that they were so strongly compelled to do it that they almost couldn't do otherwise. And that language resonates if there is free will. However, if you reduce it in a non-free will scenario, then I couldn't do otherwise is like, well, then why are we clapping our hands for you?
Exactly. But then you have slightly then shifted what you're saying, which is no longer, if you believe in free will, it's no longer quite, we admire that you made that decision. We say we admire that you've got a good heart that made you make that decision, which is a slightly different thing, because you're not admiring the choice they made, you're admiring their character. And that's what virtue ethics is all about, by the way. It says, like, it's not so much that we admire the thing you've done, it's that we admire the virtuous character that indicates, and that's the thing that's admired. And that's actually a lot more compatible with the no free will thing.
But I think that the admiration of the heart only makes sense if there is free will, and so if I think either if you're going to talk about the internal or the external, I think they both are commendable on free will, and neither are commendable without free will.
I think that the reason I say that you've shifted it from the action to the heart is because we've essentially pushed the problem back, which is now we have to decide: did you decide to have a good heart or a bad heart? And again, like as a Christian, as someone who believes in free will, you say, oh, of course, like it's you choose. You might not choose crudely, like, oh, I'm just going to have a good heart now. But it might be something like, well, you can develop a good heart through making the right decisions. But then we sort of come full circle, because then we've got to talk about free will and decision making again. The question is, if you have a good heart and I have a bad heart, did we choose to have a good heart and a bad heart in any meaningful sense? And believe me when I say that this is a conversation that has been going on for a very long time, and we can take it as far as you want because it's your show. But
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
what
I
happens
would
is
say-
the
I would say
same
yes.
problem kind of keeps arising at different
Yeah.
levels. It's at the level of the action, then at the level of the heart, then at the level of like the soul or whatever, and the question just keeps arising. Whatever it is
Yeah.
that determines that action, were you in control of it? And I think that ultimately the answer is no.